It's your host, Kyla Bolden, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, we have a very special guest on the podcast. It's Howard Moriah. He is the Executive Director of BGC Durham, and I've actually known Howard for a number of years, basically the whole lifetime that WizKid Learning has existed. He used to work at East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club, and East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club is actually one of the first big, or if not the first big organization that we actually did programming with, and we still do programs with them today. We also do programs with BGC Durham, which has been amazing to be able to work with them. In this episode, we talk a lot about how to create programming that goes beyond engagement and actually transforms students' lives. So Howard talks about his desire to create programming that breaks generational poverty, that sets students up to have better lives down the road, better careers, and we talk about the ways that we could do this. So it was really, really great to have him on the podcast. He has a lot of experience in this space. So I really hope you guys enjoy this episode, and let's get into it. But Howard, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I was really excited to have you on for a number of reasons. The first reason is because you were one of the first people our company actually worked with, first organization when you were back at East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club. And we've been working with them now for about 8 years, I want to say, like since
Yeah,
2016.
it's crazy.
So yeah, it is really crazy. And the company has obviously evolved so much from them, but it was a really great experience. And I think from working with East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club that first year, it kind of showed like us as like founders of the company, and just like it showed us that WizKit Learning is making an impact and it can go on
Mhm.
and grow. So I really appreciate you for that.
Yeah. You know what's interesting about that? I remember when I was talking with your parents, and I
Mhm.
think that what it was that when they came with WizKids, I hadn't seen anything like that. And I'd been back in Canada for about at that point in time, I think about 4 years.
Mhm.
And I recall telling a colleague of mine in Portland had started this work around sort of ensuring that Black children and Black youth had access to sort of technology training and learning and so forth, right? And I just watched the evolution of the work that she was doing, and she's now national across the country, and and I was like going, oh my goodness, if we could do something like that here in Canada. And when they came in, I was like, oh, this is exactly what we need to have happen here in Canada, because technology, our kids are great at playing games.
Mhm.
They enjoy gaming, um, but they don't have access to understanding what's behind the gaming. And I think that was always been the thing for me. So when we get a chance to connect and see, us, yeah, let's make this happen. Let's figure it out how we can make it happen. And I'm glad to see that the evolution and how what you folks are doing has grown and how you've expanded. And I know that the best is yet to come. That's the reality. The best is yet to come. So it's an
Thank
honor to be
you.
here and sort of participate in this today.
Thank you so much. And I so appreciate you saying this. One of the questions that I like to ask is, I know that you were at East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club. You've worked in the Boys and Girls Clubs for a while now. Now you're at BGC Durham. And
Yes.
I obviously work with kids as well too. And I always wonder, was it something from your childhood that influenced you to go into the role that you're in today? So for me, I always loved working with kids. I definitely tutored growing up and did all of those types of things, but I did not think I was going to go into such a student focused role until I
Mm,
actually like fell into WizKit learning and it happened, and I was like, okay, this really is a lot of my passions all built into one. But
yeah.
for you, was there anything like that came from your childhood that made you think, okay, I want to really dedicate my life and my career to
Mhm.
youth impact?
So I grew up in rural Nova Scotia for the most part. So there wasn't really access to a lot of program or services. So I
Mhm.
can't definitively say that there was anything in my childhood that led to me sort of saying, I want to do this work. I do know that around my second or third year in university, I began to sense that I wanted to work with youth.
Mm.
And I'd always taught Sunday school as a child. So, I mean, as a young person growing up. So I don't know if that sort of played a role in it. But by the time I got to post-secondary in my second and third year, I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And at that point in time, I was on a trajectory to complete my degree in psychology. So, and back then in those days, you had two options for psych. Well, you only had really one option for psychology back in those days, and that was like you're going to be you're doing more studies, so you're more with the mice and all. And that wasn't
Yeah.
my thing. I actually wanted to support the counseling aspect of it. And that wasn't a huge thing back in the day. And I remember having some conversations, like, with my sociology professor, and then looking at social psych. So I really kind of got into that whole area of community development, looking through those lenses at an early stage. And I, as part of that journey, I said, okay, what's the most effective way to do that? And I'll be honest with you, that was a point in time, and I know it's a controversial issue today, but that was a point in time where I was like, you know what? Policing seemed to be like the perfect angle, I thought.
Mm.
At that point in time, I honestly felt that, you know, I would, as a police officer, you know, I would be able to work with young people. That could be my motivation to helping them to help to sort of move forward, and I
Yeah.
could be a mentor and all that. And I realized, but that it didn't work out for me. And so I remember coming home, and I didn't get into the RCMP, and I was disappointed I didn't get into the RCMP. But then I just kind of, what other options are there for me?
Yeah.
And so that next natural option for me was going to seminary and looking at becoming a youth pastor.
Hmm.
And it's from there the evolution of where I am today began. So once I got into that becoming a youth pastor, I was like, wait a minute, yeah, I definitely want to do this, you know? And so what I did at that point in time is I remember in my first year, I had a gentleman from Chicago come, and he was talking about actually doing youth ministry in the community. And I was like, going, whoa, wait a minute, what's that? Like, because my perspective of youth ministry is like in a church setting,
Church. Yeah.
right? And he said, no, we're talking about doing youth ministry in the community. And you hear me now, it's like, oh yeah, definitely. So from that first year, set everything in motion so that my third year, I can actually go to Chicago
Hmm.
and do this 6-month internship. And that's what I did. I set it out, and I said to them, because I am in rural Nova Scotia, I grew up in Nova Scotia, I'm going to Chicago. I said, I want you to put me in the heart of the community. I don't want to be, I'm not interested in just sort of commuting in and out of the community. I want to be in the community. I want to work in
Yeah.
the community. I want to live, I want to understand the community. And that was life changing. I ended up living in Chicago for 6 months, for a year and a half, actually.
Oh, wow.
Initially for 6 months, and then coming back for a full year up until 9/11. But those 6 months, that year and a half that I was there, sorry, I was living in Cabrini Green, which
Hmm.
pretty much no longer exists. But that's where I started doing the work in terms of after school program, understanding some of the challenges that the community was encountering, understanding the level of racism that existed within the community, and the barriers that was existed to sort of young people being successful. So that sort of opened my eyes and
Hmm.
set me on a trajectory to where I am.
Wow, I actually had no idea that you were a youth pastor. That's
Yeah.
so cool. That's new to me. And I'm sure like your experience in Chicago and especially working with Black youth definitely informed what you've been doing in the youth
Oh,
development space, right?
oh,
Um,
most definitely.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
commend you for actually being like, okay, I want to go in the center of the community because I think one of the things that happens a lot in these development spaces, sometimes the people that are in your roles or are making the decision are so far removed from
Yes.
actual people that the programming are trying to benefit.
Mhm.
And because of that, there's a mismatch of the types of programming that's created and need, even them being able to see themselves in you definitely helps you to make even a bigger impact.
Yeah, you have to. I would say that that has been one of the fundamental things for me over the years is that I need to be in community to able to effectively work with community.
Hmm.
Even when I went to East Scarborough, I could have worked in East Scarborough and not live in East Scarborough.
Hmm.
But no, I worked and lived in East Scarborough.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I had a much better understanding of, to your point of what was happening in the community. I had the pulse of the community. And interesting, even though I had the pulse of the community, I was also well aware that I didn't grow up in the community. And
Yeah.
and those are some things that you have to keep in mind. So during that community development work, even I look back in Chicago, I went into Chicago, I learned, I understood from the community perspective, but I always was well aware that I'm not from Chicago. I didn't grow up in the projects. And when I get to East Scarborough, I'm not from East Scarborough. I'm a rural Black man that grew
Hmm.
up, a Black man who grew up in rural communities. And so for me, coming into that urban context was to understand the dynamics of the urban context so that I can ensure that whatever program development piece or community development piece is happening, it's a benefit to the community. I'm
Hmm.
not coming with the lens that I already know what you need.
Hmm.
And then there's a reverse of that. Leaving East Scarborough and coming out to Durham, I have to remind myself I can't come to Durham, which is sort of this suburban kind of a feel. I can't come with my city mentality and say, well, I've worked in East Scarborough, I've worked in Toronto, and I know what's best for you in Durham. I can't come with that. I need to come into Durham and understand what are the challenges that are happening in Durham. So I think when we're looking at community development, it's absolutely essential that we actually understand what's happening on the ground, understand our
Hmm.
community, and understand even if you've lived in the community, a community changes.
Yeah.
And so be prepared to support the community with the changes that are taking place. And you're better positioned to provide the services that the community needs when you're willing to hear and listen to the folks that are on the ground.
Hmm. I definitely agree. And I think that helps you even be able to create better programming. For my listeners that don't already know, could you
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about your role at BGC Durham and maybe what you did at East Scarborough? I'm not sure if it's very similar, but tell us a little
Mhm.
bit more about what you're doing now.
So my role has at BGC Durham now is I'm the executive director.
Hmm.
I've been the executive director now for just a little over a year.
Hmm.
Um, the role really is looking at strategic direction for the organization,
Hmm.
and also supporting ensuring there's that strong financial management.
Hmm.
And then there's an element in my mind is how am I supporting the development of the team? And so that whole aspect of professional development for my team. So I have directors, I have program coordinators, and then I have frontline after school program staff. We have frontline youth services staff and youth justice. So how do I support the professional development of the team?
Hmm.
And so that's what I see my role as being within the organization. I would say the other critical piece too, and I'm starting to do now that I'm into a year in a position, is that what are the tables that I need to be sitting at in the community that supports the work that we do,
Hmm.
or potentially broadens the work that we do. So there's an element of community engagement from a that has to that is a part of that role. And so those for me tend to be the four big areas within the organization. But I would also say that the challenge with that is that being somebody who worked at East Scarborough, where I was doing similar work, but at a lower level. At East Scarborough, I was really focused on sort of like the youth services team. I was supporting our after school program at one point in time in my role there, and along with facilities. And one of the biggest challenges in my growth is letting go of that program development perspective
Hmm.
and getting to that higher strategic thinking in terms of what are the outcomes we're looking for, and not so much what are the types of programs we're looking to deliver. So even in my role now, when I talk with the team about, for example, about STEM programming, I'm more focused on what are the outcomes that this program, what's the impact this program will have, and then it's the team's responsibility to figure out the programming that will be successful in
Hmm.
will bring about those outcomes.
Yeah. And I completely understand that, like trying to focus more on the strategic level, not getting on in the weeds of,
Hmm.
the execution.
Hmm.
But one of the things that I was speaking with somebody else at like another community center about was creating very like holistic programs. And what I mean by that is oftentimes our goal might be, let's say, to get students in for homework help, but then we are not thinking always about like transportation or if the
Hmm.
students are hungry or like things like that that really impact your outcome when it comes to what your strategic outcome is, but isn't even necessarily correlated to
Hmm.
the outcome that you're trying to hit, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes we're not able to reach our goals in one area because of something completely indirect. Like, we are not getting a lot of people coming to soccer. Why is that? It's not because there's a lot of no one interested in playing soccer. It's because the bus route doesn't run past the
Hmm.
community center, so the students can't even get there. So, and one of the things that I know you've done throughout your career is really create very innovative programming when it comes to, especially educating like BIPOC youth. I mean, when you were at East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club, I would say we came in and did coding for several years and still do it now, which is great. But a lot of people weren't doing that back then when it came
Hmm.
to even younger kids. And you're willing to take a chance on that and try something new was really cool. But I wonder what are some of the biggest challenges you faced in your efforts to nurture the potential of BIPOC communities when it comes to programming?
I feel that that folks within the community didn't necessarily see the potential of youth. I think in some ways that we tended to we tend to easily go with what's the expectation of the larger educational system,
Hmm.
right? Uh, I think I'll give you an example. Right now, for me, I'm looking at the work that we're doing, and there are times I feel that we're not looking at the larger systemic issues that are impacting the community.
Hmm.
And so there's no foundation for why we're doing the work. And without the foundation of understanding why we're delivering the work, we don't have a sense of what we're trying to accomplish or where we can go with the work that we're doing. And so, I look at our BIPOC communities, and we are overrepresented in so many areas that we shouldn't be overrepresented in, whether it be under education, not completing high school, unemployment, or if you want to get technical, even if we are graduating, we're not well represented in the IT sector.
Hmm.
Okay, and so how do we address that? And I think for me, it's always been about ensuring that our programming is providing the tools for young people to break those barriers down. So it's about breaking those barriers down.
Hmm.
And so education is just it's not just about simple education, but it's about actual learning.
Yeah.
It's not about the math and the numeracy, which is important,
Hmm.
but it's also about the critical thinking that comes with that. It's about those transferable skills that comes with that programming that we're developing. And I think within the BIPOC community, those who are developing program are not always looking to develop programming to break down or help young people overcome barriers.
Hmm.
We can easily fall into that trap where we go with the stereotypical programs or activities and just say, well, we're engaging them. We're engaging youth,
Yeah.
So we'll do the sport. We're doing basketball. We're engaging them in basketball. But what can we do? What can we do be doing more than just engaging them with basketball? What
Hmm.
are some of the life skills or transferable skills that can be taught through basketball? And
Hmm.
so we are faced with a lot of challenges, whether it be racism, whether it be, like say, undereducation, whether it be underemployment, whether it be not the number of young people graduating from high school or post secondary. And if you look at those numbers, they can continue to decrease even more. We are overrepresented in the youth justice system, and so we're overrepresented in the child protection services.
Hmm.
So how do we ensure that even if we are overrepresent those, how do we ensure that those children are getting the opportunities to break the barriers so that we're not repeating that? We have communities in poverty. if we don't provide innovative programming and solutions for young people, then we're not going to break the cycle of poverty that they're in. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes we're not looking at the work from the perspective of breaking a cycle. We're looking at the work from just delivering a service.
Yeah.
So I'm just doing a program. I'm just running a program. But for
Mhm.
me, when I look around, what we are doing needs to be about breaking the cycle of poverty. It needs to be about overcoming barriers. And if it's not about overcoming barriers, not breaking the cycle, then why are we doing it?
Mhm.
Because we should not be doing a program that's going to perpetuate, keep a barrier in place, or keep young people from, or whether that be education. We should be running programs that's going to help young people to overcome barriers. And if we're not doing
Absolutely.
it, we shouldn't be in the game. If we're not
Yeah.
looking to transform communities and change lives, we don't need people that have a good heart. We got a lot of people with good heart.
Mhm.
We need people who are going to come and bring programming and services that is going to help young people to pursue their dreams and be successful in whatever they choose to be.
Yeah. I completely agree with you because we use the word engagement a lot, and engagement, it needs to be more than just
Mm-hmm.
let's engage them while they're here. So, that's a plus. No, we need to be actually giving them skills in order for them, like you said, to break the cycle of poverty, to break barriers. And here's the thing, in this day and age with access to information and also the programming that's out there, it could be easily implemented, right?
Yeah.
And I always give the example of this when I went to high school, and I grew up in Bermuda and then I went to high school in the States. I had kids in my grade that were interning for major companies as
Mm-hmm.
high school students, right? Graduated university, have already had 6 years of experience working summers in corporate jobs, right?
Yeah.
And in part, yes, there's definitely socioeconomics in play and connections in play too, but it's also just like knowing the information that that was even possible. I didn't know that that was
Mm-hmm.
possible at the time, right? And there's so many things, or even like taking AP classes or taking university classes, right? Like as high school
Yes.
students, that is possible. I think our expectations are so low, especially
Mm-hmm.
for individuals who are more in like higher need areas, that we're
Yeah.
not even giving them the opportunity to really succeed because we're like, okay, let's just make sure they're, not out in trouble. Okay,
Thank you. Yeah.
that's not a
Exactly.
high enough bar, you
Yeah.
know? You could do that while actually giving them the skills, giving them the tools to actually change their lives. If students are able to get, I use this example, like a cybersecurity certificate in a certain skill in high school, that could change the trajectory of what they decide to go study in university, the jobs that
Mm-hmm.
they're able to intern at. It could literally change their life. And it would not be even that much harder to do than having a basketball program, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's super important to think critically about, okay, yes, engagement, but how can we put this person on a pathway to have economic stability, to live a happy life, to have more opportunities, right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing, I think. Not just I think we talk a lot about like, is college necessary? Is college not necessary? That's like a bigger conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it has
Mm-hmm.
more to do with how much college costs, especially in the
Mm-hmm.
States. But
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we want to just give students as much opportunities as possible, good opportunities, rather than opportunities where they feel like their only pathway is to a job that they're not going to like.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of like that engagement. And are we intentional in engagement that we have and that we provide? Like, you know, I just don't feel that for the most part that we are. I feel that we are just. It goes back to something you said earlier on. It becomes a numbers game, and it's all
Yeah.
about numbers. It's not about life transformation. It's
Hmm.
not about, and then to me, that's what the work needs to be about. It's transforming lives. It's you said it. It's about giving them that opportunity, that leg up. It's how
Hmm.
expanding their minds as to where they could be. I remember when I was in Portland, the community college in Portland had this matrix that they did in terms of career paths, right? And here's what I loved about it. It gave you a sense of what you can take out of high school, right? And be able to start working. But
Hmm.
then it also showed you that if you did 2 years in 2 years in high school in post secondary, here's the jobs that you can have. If you graduated, sorry, from college, 2 years in college, here's what you can do. If you did 3 years, a 3 year program in college, here's what you can do. If you go on to university, so it just kept showing young people the upward trajectory that they could pursue in a particular sector, a
Yeah.
particular field. That's amazing because as a young person, if I don't like school,
Yeah.
I don't want to go to college for 2, 4 years. I don't want to
Hmm.
go to university for 5 or 6 years, right? I just want to start working, but I have an interest in IT. Well, I can start in cybersecurity,
Hmm.
and I can start coming out of high school. I can have training to your point and certification, so I can start my cybersecurity. I get into cybersecurity industry. I really love this.
Hmm.
What's the next level? And
Yeah.
so I don't have. I feel that sometimes we I've been guilty of it. You push that education because you know it's important,
Hmm.
right? But if I'm not ready for it, what are you going to give me otherwise? And that's
Absolutely.
why it's so crucial for us to be able to provide them with an array of opportunities. And I think that's when you're looking at community agencies,
Hmm.
we're positioned to provide that more so than the educational system. The
Oh,
education
absolutely.
system has its own check boxes they have to meet.
Hmm.
We have the opportunity to be innovative in the programs that we're offering so that we can set young people on a trajectory towards success,
Hmm.
whatever that success may look like for them. And they get to define that. We
Hmm.
provide the platform and we work with other community partners to provide that platform.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, I think something that WizKid Learning has always been passionate about is that education as it is now and as it has been for 100 years, it's going to take a long time for them to change and catch up to where they need to be in order to properly prepare students for the future. And because of reasons definitely outside of teachers' control, it is going to be nearly impossible for us to change the whole structure of how the education
Mhm.
system works to properly educate kids in these areas. But where the gap could very well be solved is with community organizations like you guys, because you guys have the students after school. You have the ability to really bridge the gap when it comes to sometimes that even alternative education or those certificate
Yes.
programs and all of those things
Yeah.
in order to make sure, okay, the students need to go to school and things like teacher cuts too make it hard for schools to actually even
Yeah.
venture into these more innovative subjects. But they need to go to schools, learn their ABCs, learn their basics, and parents have to work, so they have to go to school during the day for even like childcare reasons. But
Yeah.
at organizations like yours, it's really a great opportunity for them to get introduced to a lot of interesting pathways, learn a lot of awesome soft skills that they might not be able to even learn in school. Just even simple things like class
Mm.
sizes being too big.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so many
Yeah.
things that community organizations like yours really, really do a great job in preparing kids. Another question I have to ask you is
Be-
regarding, sorry, go on.
Before you ask that question, I just
Yeah.
want to add something to that. And one of the other challenges, as you're talking, one of the other challenges we also face is that we are there's a we work in silos.
Mm.
Okay. And you talked about the educational system, and it just came to me when you talked about the educational system is that the educational system sees themselves as the only ones that are able to educate children.
Yeah.
So we have a very narrow view of what education looks like in North America or within Western
Yeah.
culture.
Hmm.
And if you look, we're not viewed as a part of that continuous learning.
Mm.
We're not looking at being able to provide young people with the skills that will help them to be successful in the classroom. Like it's almost as if the educational system is the only system and the current structure of it excludes community development work, and says
Hmm.
we're the only ones that are capable of educating and equipping children to be successful in life.
Hmm.
Rather than saying, you know what, we're but one factor. They're with us from this time, and then they go off and they're here. And how do we work collaboratively between educational institutions and community development organizations to enhance and ensure success of the children in our community? It's a
Hmm.
shared responsibility. It's not a one or, it's both are essential in children's success. And I think right now, when I've been in spaces where some educators act like they're it. It's all about them.
Yeah.
And then when you, how dare you come in and use my space to deliver a program? No, it's not your space. It's a shared space. It's not your children. It's our children.
Yeah.
And so the same children, and I've seen situations where, you know, it's their children during the day and then it's our children after school. No, it's
Hmm.
our children collectively. And
Hmm.
so we're all a part of this development of this young person. And if we don't get on the same page with that, the educational system can't do it by itself. We can't do it by ourselves. It has to be a collaborative effort between the educational system and those who are doing community development work in the after school, in the out of school time hours to
Hmm.
ensure that there's that success of young people and that they will overcome the barriers. If we continue to work in silos, the work that we do will be undone and the work that they do will be undone because there's no continuity
Yeah.
in that. There's no collaboration in ensuring that the children in our communities are we're looking after the children and they're successful.
I love that you brought that up because I do think about that all the time because we work with schools and we work with organizations. And one of the things that we notice is that they always, even in the same city, sometimes they're not working together, which surprises us. And so, for instance, I was speaking with a organization, not an organization, sorry, a school that runs summer programming. And it's for advanced students, but then it's also for students that might have like failed math or like failed a subject, but they're all filled up with their spots, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I said to them, well, in a lot of these programming, some of them could be done online. So they like, they go into the school, they log onto the computer and they're like taking a math class online. And I said to them, like, why don't you guys also just do it in the library, the local library? And then there's a community center that has computers. Like, why don't you guys work together so that some of the students that are taking credit recovery courses can maybe go to the community center and take it rather than only having it to be into school? And their response was like, oh, like, no, like we don't do that. So there's going to be
Mm-hmm.
kids who have to repeat math the following year rather than being able to repeat it at the school simply because the school doesn't have spaces for the students
Mm-hmm.
to be there. Not even a teacher problem because the teachers aren't even doing it. It's like just like we have 30 spaces for summer school and now we don't have
That's
that
it.
space. And
Yep.
I think to myself, I know community centers that sometimes their computer labs are not even being used half the
Yeah.
time. Like,
Yeah.
why don't you guys work with them? And it's so interesting because I think we do have the infrastructure to really build an incredible holistic education system, including community organizations and
Yes.
schools. I don't think resources are really the problem. I think in a lot of ways it's planning and willing to work with each other.
You know what it is? I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's a mindset, and I'll give you two
Hmm.
examples why I think it's a mindset. I was in Portland and we had an opportunity to do something that's called a teaching and learning review. So
Hmm.
it was about the community coming in to understand the teaching process, understanding the learning process, what's happening in the classroom. Teachers were somewhat, I remember, like how you bringing in community people into this space to talk about,
Yeah.
like their community are going to tell us how to do education. No, no, we just want to see what's happening. And
Hmm.
then what was interesting is that we saw how, and we're able to highlight how even within one district,
Hmm.
you had different learnings taking place. In the more affluent schools, the learning style is completely different from the low income schools. And
Wow.
our question was, why are we not sharing that knowledge?
Hmm.
It's just that's all we're saying, just knowledge sharing, so that the same thing that, and that's an example, the same thing could be happening across the district.
So, one of the big questions that we try to answer at the Future Focused Learning podcast is how do we successfully prepare students for the future? And with like the increase of technology, being like more prevalent and things like AI, there's in changing, even workforce development and what the careers will be in the future. It's become a tougher question to ask because we know that the jobs that maybe somebody who's 7 years old right now are going to be going into the future are not the jobs that are happening right now. So how do we prepare them for that? So, in your opinion, and you've created like a lot of like really innovative programs and helped develop innovative programs throughout your time at the Boys and Girls Clubs, what are some of the key skills that you think students need to know in order to be successful? And then how are we able to create programs in order to prepare them for it?
It's crazy to think that we're in 2024, but I still think STEM is way behind.
Oh, absolutely.
When I look across the board in terms of what's happening in community programs, like equipping our young people for even AI, we're or the next or we're the evolution of technology is going. We're not even caught up with where it is now.
Mhm.
Let
No,
alone
not
to think
even
of where
cut.
we have to be a bit more intentional in providing the skills in the area of science, technology, and engineering and mathematics. I think we really have to be a bit more intentional. I think to the point that that's what we see, that technology is the future, right? And as much as maybe I would say maybe a good 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, you could say that STEM was just okay. Yeah, we know STEM's important.
Hmm.
STEM is critical.
Yeah.
It's absolutely critical as we move forward. Our space that we're heading into is more in that realm, right? So we have to definitely start to lay the foundation, and we have to definitely engage our children at a younger age. In that, we have to find innovative ways to do that. The innovation is happening on a global scale, and I think sometimes what ends up happening is that we kind of look around us and see who's doing it around here. And then if it comes from externally, we're like, oh, well, it doesn't have our context, so we can't do anything with it. We're
Mhm.
waiting to, we're not innovative in looking at how people are doing some of this work on a global scale. And so we definitely need to do that and look at some of that work that's happening with children at a very early age to engage them. I do agree, though, that we don't know what the future holds. And so, what are the skills? That whole piece about adaptability,
Yeah.
the ability to shift on the fly. That's what our young people are going to have to be able to do.
Mhm.
They're going to have to be able to shift on the fly, but you can't shift on the fly if you don't have the basic foundations,
That's so true.
right? And so, as much as the adaptability is important, you're only able to adapt if you have the foundational skills. So, if we're hearing that the next 30, 40, 50 years and AI is going to be evolving, and different aspects of technology is going to be technology going to play more of a role in our life. How do we start? We need to start looking at foundational skills that would allow our young people to be able to navigate that changing workforce.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example of what happens when we don't do that it's on a sort of like a larger scale. I I grew up in Nova Scotia, and if anybody did Canadian history, they know that farming, mining, fishing, forestry, those were some of the mainstays for economies for the longest while. Manufacturing was the one in Ontario, right?
Mhm.
But we never looked at that, how that was going to change in 20, 30 years down the road. And I remember my mom saying to me, like, we're living in a fishing community. She's like, you're not going to go to fish. You're not going to go to a fish plant because in the sense that little did we know then that fishing was not going to be like a primary career for
Mhm.
some folks. Like the fishing industry, what it is now and what it used to be is completely
Totally
night and day.
different. Yeah.
And I say that because if we don't prepare our young people for what the future is is going to bring, then they're not going to be able to adapt, right? And so, in order for us to equip them, I think we need to start looking at what's the future hold in terms of employment opportunities. What does it look like? Is technology going to be the driving force? And what aspect of technology will be the driving force? And then how do we equip them with the foundational knowledge now and the foundational experience so they can shift and pivot when they need to pivot, right? And I think the other thing is teaching them how to pivot. What does that look like? We don't do that as a whole. As a society, we don't do that very well. We don't like change. We don't like change. And so our young people need to understand that things will change and they have to be able to adapt to that change. They can't hold grievances when the change takes place,
Yeah.
right? And we're a society right now that when change takes place, we have grievances. We don't try to figure out how to navigate and work with the changes that are taking place.
Mhm. I completely agree, and I love that you brought up STEM, obviously because very focused in STEM, but we talk a lot about literacy rates being low, and
Mm-hmm.
that is true. It's very scary that some students are entering high school and they don't know how to read.
Yeah.
But I think, and we spoke about this on another episode of our podcast, like we know how to teach kids to read. Like it's the problem isn't we don't know how to teach kids to read. It's other socioeconomic system problems, etc., that are allowing students to get through elementary school without
Mm-hmm.
having the proper literacy skills. Now, when it comes to STEM, we are important engineers at a very high rate. We don't do a very good job with pushing and teaching those subjects,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, these are foundational skills that, yes, we don't know what that 7-year-old, 10 years, 20 years down the road, rather, is going to the career that they're going to go into. It might not even exist yet, but we do know if that 7-year-old that's now 27 doesn't know anything about how to code, doesn't understand like basic digital literacy, like all of these skills beyond a consumer side, right? Like
Yeah.
from like an innovator side, they're not going to even be able to go out and get that job, right? That
Yeah.
job's not going to be an option for them, right? So when we talk about job stability, when we talk about preparing students for the future, the best we could do is educate them in these foundational skills. Teach them to be innovators, teach them the skills like artificial intelligence, as we were just talking about,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that those industries are just going to go grow. We know
Yeah.
that, and we know that other industries are shrinking
Yeah.
rather. So why not educate them in things that we know there's going to be opportunities? We might not know the exact name of that job, like I think we had an instructor at WizKit Learning that's worked for us for 3 years, and now she's a full-time IoT engineer, Internet of Things engineer, right? That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a like job description 20
Yeah.
years ago, right?
Yeah.
But because she went into AP Computer Science when she was in high school, because she decided to study computer science, she was able to then go and get a job in something that is relatively new. If we would have just been like, okay, we're just going to focus on the humanities route because we don't know what the jobs are going to be, she wouldn't even be able to go get that
Yes.
job.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's an element of forward thinking that we don't see, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're not equipping and preparing the next generation. We already know where the careers are going to head when it comes to IT. We know where
Yeah.
it's going to head. We know that, and there's some brains there that already know what's coming in the future. They
Yeah.
see it, right? The challenge that we're facing, though, is that for whatever reason, we still want to continue down the path of the very traditional way of doing education.
Hmm.
Uh, there's that forward thinking is not there. We are divesting in our educational system,
Hmm.
right? You raised a point about engineers coming in. I remember when I was again. I go back to Portland, Oregon, because I remember specifically looking at this as part of my work there, right? And I remember us looking at it and thinking, "Oh my goodness!" Like there's a lack of engineers being coming up through the educational system. We talked about this,
Hmm.
and that gap was so huge, particularly in Silicon Valley, that they had to import.
Yeah.
The same thing is happening now. We are actually doing a disservice to students that are here, to children that are here in the country who are born here. We're doing a disservice to them because we're not equipping them for the jobs that are coming. Other countries are doing it, and we're
Yeah.
having to import them. They're coming here.
Hmm.
And then that creates another dynamic, which we won't get into, but
Yeah.
that creates another dynamic of, wait a minute, they're taking the jobs from us.
Hmm.
But if you're not equipping people for the job, somebody's got to do the job.
Absolutely. And we
And
do
so
have the tools to teach them it now, right?
we
But we're just
do.
not doing it.
We're not doing it. And I go back to something I said. I think this is where the role of community agencies comes into play.
Hmm.
We're better positioned than the educational system to pivot when it comes to some of these programs,
Hmm.
right? What one of the things I have always loved about, and one of the reasons why I've always pushed and really encouraged for STEM, because I know with STEM, we can tackle two fundamental skills that supports the educational system:
Hmm.
numeracy and literacy.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so why are we not, and if I'm a young person, and I always said this, and I get excited, and somebody introduced me to artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing,
Yeah.
right? All of a sudden, I have that excitement, and now I want to learn more about artificial intelligence. When I go to school, I will apply myself when it comes to literacy. I will apply myself when it comes to it. I'll apply myself when it comes to science, because you know what? You've gotten me excited about learning something new and innovative
That's
that
the
I never
key.
that I did. And I think to me that is a critical piece. That is to your point. That's a key,
Hmm.
and we don't do enough of that to get our kids to say, you know what? I want to pursue STEM.
Hmm.
You look at space travel and all this stuff that we there's mixed feelings about space travel. The money could be better used in our community to help with poverty. True. And just think that if we actually educated some of our young people in where that whole field is going, that would break the cycle of poverty.
That's the thing. Teaching kids STEM, like as you said, it helps with literacy. It helps. I've yet to meet somebody who's really good at math, not be able to write a good essay. It is literally just an
Mm-hmm.
algorithm, it's sequences, etc. Helps with literacy, helps with numeracy, but it also is one of the best ways to break the cycle of poverty with the skill that you could learn at home, you could learn at a community center. You have access to be able to learn it. You could very well go out and get a better paying job than you would with most other skills outside of STEM, like a guaranteed better paying job. And we talk about even cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is booming. And I was talking with somebody who leads one of the cybersecurity departments at the RCMP, and they were telling us that when new technology comes on the market, the criminals
Yeah.
have it automatically.
Yeah.
The government has to go and vet it for 18 months
Yeah.
prior to be able to even utilize it. Because of things like that, there are more and more jobs being created in this field, right? They
Mm-hmm.
need people, they need smart people, they need butts in seats. So it's so important, and I'm glad that you pointed out because sometimes I think we underestimate the changes that we could make and the impact we can make when teaching kids STEM because it's obviously just been in the media so much. It could become sensationalized, but no, when you really look into it, it's a way that we could really change lives. The last
Yeah.
question oh, sorry, go on.
No, I agree with you. I mean, that's why for me, when I look at where we're headed as an organization, we're coming up on our strategic plan, and we're in a process of our strategic planning right now. And program and services is going to be one of those areas that we're looking at.
Mhm.
And for me, the question that I'm going to ask my team is, when you're looking at the program and services that we're delivering, how is that breaking the cycle of poverty in our community?
Mhm.
We're in Oshawa, we have five priority neighborhoods in our community in the city of Oshawa, which is not Oshawa is not huge.
Mhm.
To have five priority neighborhoods. And we have to ask ourselves, if we're serving in five priority neighborhoods, what are we doing that's going to break that cycle? If our program and services is not equipping and supporting breaking the cycle of poverty, then we need to check ourselves and ask, wait a minute, should we be doing this work at all?
Yeah.
Right? Because if we're not changing the trajectory of young people, we're not opening up their eyes to opportunity. We're not presenting the opportunities in front of them. And all we're doing is the same old that we've been doing for 15, 20 years, 30 years. Then we need to get out of the business, because I I would hate to say that I've been in the community working for a good 10, 15 years, right? And I can't say that I've had an impact on poverty. And I get it. It's not gonna be a straight, oh yeah, we did this and then poverty broke. I get that. But can I honestly say, at the end of the day, that we've done everything that's possible to break the cycle of poverty? Have we ensured that all the children that walk through our doors, okay, have had an opportunity to explore their path? Have we exposed them to STEM? Have we exposed them to whatever it is? Have we exposed them to it? Or are we just saying, you know what? Because you're in this neighborhood, we only have to offer you this, or because this is our organization, which is something that I've heard about too. I've heard too. Well, we're a recreational organization, so all we have to do is offer recreation. No, we're a social recreational organization, and because of the nature of our organization, we're better equipped to provide the community with an array of programming services.
Mhm. Absolutely. And just kind of, you really touched on it, which was my last question, was how, for other community leaders like you who are like leading community organizations, what do you think is like the most important, like if you had to give them one piece of advice on how to create impactful programming, what would that piece
Mhm.
of advice be?
Yeah, I think for me is that we we touched on a little bit earlier, is listening.
Mm.
I think it's active listening to what the community is calling for.
Yeah.
But and that's where that engagement comes in, and it's very difficult because I think you said one thing, because I think there's an element of it that we also need to assess our community. We need to assess what our community needs. We need to take a look and see, are there reports out there that's been, most communities have already done the work.
Mhm.
Regions have already, cities or regions have already done the work in terms of what are some of the areas that's lacking or that could help, that would strengthen community, you know? But then are we listening to on the ground? Are we listening to parents? Are we listening to youth? Are we listening to children? Are we listening to other folks who are potential collaborative partners to hear where should we and where could we be developing programs?
Mhm.
You know, it's not sufficient to say that, you know what, well, because we've been here for so many years and we established this early on, that I should do this program. We really need to hear what our community's asking for, what they're looking for, and we need to be able to respond to that, you know. And you have to be open to being collaborative. You
Mm.
have to have, yeah, have to have collaborative partners, and it has to be true collaboration with the intent of changing the dynamics of a community. And unless we're committed to that, the work we will have an impact.
Mhm.
It's not that we won't have an impact, it's the level of impact that we have is the question. And what level of impact do people want to have on their community?
Mhm. Absolutely. I think that's an incredible point to end on. Howard, thank you so much for being on the podcast, speaking with me today. It's always a pleasure. And I think, we took so much out of this podcast, but I think especially thinking intentionally about the long-term impacts that we could have as individuals that work with students, and then also not limiting ourselves because something was good 15 years ago does not mean it's good today.
Mm.
So being able to be innovative and really push the barrier so we get tackle those big problems like breaking the cycle of poverty because I think it's completely possible in the work that we do, but just, changes have to be made, expectations have to be raised so that we could be able to attack that. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I so enjoyed getting the chance to speak with Howard. And please make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. And